We think of Britain as a country far removed from war, but in 1940 it was transformed into a bristling fortress. The true extent of the scale of these defences has been brought to light by a vast new survey. The Defence of Britain project recorded nearly 20,000 military sites across the country. The painstaking research was organised by the Council for British Archaeology. Francis Pryor, its president, has been investigating just what it has revealed and gives us a guided tour of these remarkable ruins.
These concrete tank traps are a mere 65 years old, so why am I, an archaeologist, so interested in them? Well, for me, they mattered just as much as a medieval castle or an Iron Age hill fort, because they were put here as a desperate measure to retain our freedom. In certain respects, we know more about, say, Roman fortifications than we do about these defences that played such a crucial role in deterring the Nazis, surely the most loathsome of enemies.
Spring 1940. The German forces swept through Europe. The question on everyone's lips was how to halt their charge. The French had constructed a vast line of fortifications along its border with Germany. It was known as the Maginot Line and was the most sophisticated network of defences ever seen. It was thought to be impregnable. But on the 10th of May, the Nazis simply outflanked the entire line and drove into the heart of northern France.
When the Germans bypassed the Maginot Line and the whole thing fell, we knew we were vulnerable. And so at that period, everything was done to prepare for an invasion.
The British thought that the invasion could come practically anywhere. All of Britain was a potential front line. The Germans might come in England itself, but they also might land in Scotland, perhaps even in Ireland. But the main expectation, rightly so, was that the invasion would come somewhere in the southeast.
This leaflet came through our letterbox. If the invader comes, what to do and how to do it. The Germans threatened to invade Great Britain. Hitler's invasions of Poland, Holland and Belgium were greatly helped by the fact that the civilian population was taken by surprise. If the Germans come by parachute, aeroplane or ship, you must remain where you are. The order is stay put.
Blocking the German advance stood the British Army and a new volunteer force, the Home Guard.
Halt! In the course of your duty, you may have the luck to come in contact with the enemy. If you do, your motto is, kill the Boche!
This citizens' army has become part of British folklore. Against all the odds, old men and young boys prepared to take on Hitler's battle-hardened armies.
You're prepared to die for your country, that's it. I mean, they weren't going to have everybody country, I mean, that's it.
That's it.
No way.
Oh, no.
But it would need more than a volunteer army. To withstand the might of Nazi Germany, the country had to be fortified. Britain couldn't afford to make the same mistake as the French had with the Maginot Line, so it would require more than one line of defence.
This pillbox is a tiny fragment of a defensive system that once covered huge tracts of coastal and inland Britain. It was the largest defensive system ever constructed in this country, and it involved a truly staggering amount of effort. These tantalizing fragments raise the question, just what were our plans to defend Britain against invasion?
The desperate retreat of the British Army at Dunkirk left the Germans poised on the other side of the Channel. The very next day, a new commander was charged with the task of defending Britain, a towering former rugby international and World War I veteran, General Tiny Ironside. Vast swathes of beaches lay totally exposed and unprotected, each one of them a potential landing zone for a Nazi armada. So Ironside's first step was to construct a coastal crust, an unbroken wall of defences that wrapped around 400 miles of Britain's most exposed shores. The task was immense. A building project on an unprecedented scale was set in motion.
That was terribly hard work. It was all shovel and wheelbarrowing, and it was very, very hard work. Thankfully, in those days, I was a young, strong man, and I could stand it.
As a 17-year-old, John Green was one of the thousands of men employed to fortify Britain. His quota was to build 2 concrete anti-tank cubes a day.
We worked all through that spring and summer, and I helped to build all these concrete anti-tank blocks, they were called, and they each weigh 13 tons.
The concrete cubes formed an impassable wall against tanks, but to block the entire front, they would have to stretch twice the length of the Maginot Line. The beaches of Britain would become unrecognizable. For the first time ever, the full extent of these remains have been exposed. They paint an intriguing picture of wartime Britain.
On 4.
"65 years ago, a huge line of anti-invasion fortifications ringed Britain's coastline. Hundreds of miles of exposed beaches were transformed by a mass of barbed wire, concrete blocks and landmines. Most of these defences have long since been dismantled, destroyed or eroded, but at Spurn Point in Yorkshire, they are extraordinarily preserved.
Now, you might wonder why anyone would bother to defend this bleak and windswept place, but the answer lies out there. That's the Humber estuary. You've got the ports of Grimsby and Hull nearby, and if you'd been here about 1,000 years ago, you'd have seen a fleet of Viking longships sailing into the heart of England unopposed. Now, that's why this has always been a strategically important place. Then in 1940, they constructed one of the most elaborate defensive systems of anywhere in England. Here is a glimpse of some of the massive defences that transformed the coastline of Britain. This huge piece of concrete is actually tipped over, but it was the base of a 9.2-inch gun, which was fixed on these threaded bars you can see here. This is the floor, and then the gun barrel was up here 10 feet above me, and it projected 60 feet out there. It was capable of lobbing shells 10 miles to take out battleships on the horizon. It could also turn around, point inland, and if any invaders had got in and were heading towards Hull or towards Spurn Head, bang, this thing took them out. This boulder clay is absolute murder to dig, but that's what they had to do to construct this thing. It was entirely built by hand, and the reason we know that is over here. The concrete here was poured directly onto the clay, and you can tell that because, look, you can see the spade marks left in the clay. So there was an enormous amount of labour went into the construction of this thing. But the ironic bit is that despite all the labour, all the effort, this gun was never fired in anger.
Spurn Head conceals a mass of fortification above and below ground. Pillboxes formed the spine of these defences. The squat concrete bunkers provided excellent cover from enemy fire, and over 18,000 were built in the summer of 1940 alone. Most pillboxes didn't have underground passages leading to them, but these tunnels provided a storage place for arms and gave secret access to the nerve centre, the pillboxes that guarded the beach.
Those big guns needed defending, and there's something we come across in archaeology. It's called defence in depth. And it means you have layers of defensive measures. And the outer layer here was provided by these pillboxes, and there are a whole series of them around Spurn Head. And they're laid out so that the rifles and machine guns can fire along the beach, and you've got a great arc of fire here.
At the height of Britain's building drive, a pillbox was completed every 20 minutes. Camouflage was their most effective protection, and they were often ingeniously and eccentrically disguised. At Spurn Head, if an invasion force managed to break through the first line of beach defences, it would immediately confront another imposing obstacle.
This is one of 2 anti-tank ditches, and it was very carefully constructed. The side of the ditch there was made steeper, so the tanks would slither down, and then this was all dug out by hand, and when they got to the bottom, wallop, they hit this, and nothing was going to get past that. And if you look at the side here, as an archaeologist, I say, whoa, I know what's going on there. That's where one tipload of concrete comes up against another one, so you can actually see how they built it. Now, bear in mind, this is 1940. They're in a frantic rush to get defences made, so they don't bother about giving this any sort of finish. They just do it.
The scale of the defences was breathtaking, but the speed at which they were built made it all the more remarkable.
Dunkirk had been and gone. The Low Countries had all been captured. France had been captured. And we didn't know what was going to happen. No one in the country knew whether we were going to be invaded or whether we weren't. And that was the urgency. We had to try and keep Jerry out somehow.
Mile upon mile of tranquil beaches were transformed into battlefields. Bristling hedges of scaffolds stopped boats from landing. Thick reams of barbed wire entangled advancing infantry, and concrete cubes blocked the path of tanks. Then minefields were thickly sown across the open ground. But it was not just Britain's open beaches that had to be fortified. At Newhaven on the south coast, the cliffs are riddled by a network of tunnels built in the 1800s.
Any way through the White Cliffs was a potential source of weakness. And that's why throughout the war there was a British Army officer stood at the top of these stairs with a barrel of petrol at his feet, and at the first sign of the Wehrmacht coming up, he'd roll the barrel forward, bang, 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 down it would go, in would go a hand grenade, whoop, and the whole thing would come crashing down. These were truly formidable defences, and any force attacking them was going to take massive casualties. But there was another side to it. The chaps who were defending here, they were professional soldiers. They knew they were cut off. They knew there was no retreat, but they were prepared to buy precious time with their lives. The point of the whole thing was to cause delay.
The coastal crust was just the first layer of the anti-invasion defences. Any invader that fought their way inland would soon have to tackle another set of obstacles. Eric Higgs was in the Cornish Home Guard. His job was to set up a roadblock on one of the main routes through Cornwall.
We came down here, and the first thing we had to do, we had 10 feet lengths of railway line, and these had to be slotted into concrete slots in the road surface, about every 2 feet, and alternating in 2 lines. Then we had to bring down huge sewer pipes, concrete sewer pipes, about 3 foot or 3'6" maybe in diameter, full of concrete, and you had iron bars, and about 5 men could roll these big bolts of concrete down to the roadblock behind the Dragon's Teeth. So you then had the Dragon's Teeth first, then these huge blocks of concrete. The roadblocks stopped the enemy, and while they were deciding what to do or trying to do, we were going to take advantage of it. That was the plan.
August 1940, the Battle of Britain raged overhead. Wave after wave of German aircraft streamed across the Channel. Their aim, to win total air superiority over southern England and destroy the RAF. Victory over the RAF was essential if the Germans were to mount an invasion on Britain. Now, the whole country had to be prepared for a new threat: German paratroopers.
We were here, and I always volunteered for the dawn watch as being the most likely time that invading troops would come. And armed with binoculars, one could scan the heavens and all around, and I must confess now that my feelings were half hopeful and half fearful.
I always thought to myself, well, what the hell was going to happen when they do come down, like, and I was looking up in the air and looking to see what we were going to do. I'd got my rifle and I'd got my bayonet at the end as well.
And I was sent out with my pike and told to be ready to bayonet paratroopers, and they might arrive, they said, disguised as nuns. Thank God I never met a nun when I was 17 with a pike, because I'd have polished her off in a minute. But it was deadly serious.
Every possible landing ground for the Germans had to be defended. In the heart of rural Wales lay RAF Carew Cheriton. It appears to be a sleepy backwater, but its green fields conceal a mass of fortifications. Defensive planners realized there was an Achilles heel in their defenses: their own airfields.
These heavy-duty pillboxes on the periphery of the airfield are not facing outwards, the direction you'd expect, because that's where an attacking force would come, but inwards over the airfield itself. The reason for this is that it was fully expected that the Germans would actually land over there. And when that happened, these things would open up and the airfield would become a killing field. This is the Battle HQ. It was the nerve centre of defensive operations and positioned on high land so that from this observation slot here, you could see the entire airfield. Below ground, and unfortunately flooded so I can't get in them, are 5 rooms with radios and telephones that were linked to the 7 pillboxes and numerous trenches that encircled the airfield. So that if anyone did attack, this place was a death trap. Every airfield was a potential target to the German bombers, and some took an absolute pounding, especially in the summer of 1940. So in an effort to relieve pressure, an elaborate scheme of fake or decoy airfields was put into operation.
The man charged with the task of deceiving the German bombers was a retired RAF officer, Colonel John Turner. He quickly enlisted the help of men who were well versed in the art of deception: set designers from the film studios at Shepperton. They formed a new top-secret unit known simply as Colonel Turner's Department. Their task was to lure German bombers away from real targets. Work started on over 500 decoy sites, which included replica Spitfires dotted along fake runways, and inflatable tanks and lorries. Baskets were filled with wood and drenched with fuel. At night, these were set alight, and from the air appeared to be blazing cities. German bomber crews assumed that these were targets that had already been pinpointed, so they too unleashed their bombs into the flames. But one of the most cunning plans was to pretend to be a taxiing Spitfire at night. It required just 2 men wobbling a high-powered torch in an empty field. Ron Barton was one of these masters of deception. His job was to convince the Luftwaffe to bomb him, and not the real airfields.
What was the purpose of this decoy stuff with the light?
This is the light that attracts the hostile pilots to the site.
So you were acting a plane?
Yes, I've acted many things. Initially, you must keep it in line, parallel with the runway.
Okay.
Imagine the plane coming down, it's taxiing, it gets to the end of the runway, and then the light goes off.
But I noticed while you were doing that, Ron, the light was jiggling.
If the light was dead straight,
they would know that it was a fixed light. The point is that the dispersal points were never perfectly level, so that the light would bounce as such with the movement of the plane.
And that looks convincing from the air, does it?
Apparently so.
The decoy sites were remarkably effective. Over half of all nighttime bombing raids aimed at RAF airfields failed, and the bombs fell on empty fields. But Britain would embark on a new phase of anti-invasion defences, built on an even greater scale. Behind the coastal crust, a new line of barriers was constructed that stretched for hundreds of miles right through the heart of the country. In the summer of 1940, the government embarked on the second phase of Britain's massive anti-invasion defences. If German forces managed to puncture through the coastal crust, a second line of fortifications awaited them. A tranquil river, a wooded glade, quiet country lanes, all hide clues to an almost forgotten network of defences. Francis Pryor has travelled to Carmarthenshire in southwest Wales and teamed up with Roger Thomas, one of the country's leading experts on World War II archaeology.
Now, Roger, what is this pillbox doing on the edge of a socking great salt marsh, right, in the middle of nowhere? I mean, why do they put it here?
Well, it's not quite as strange as it looks, because in actual fact, this is the end of 72 miles of continuous defences. And if you come up on the bank here, you can see, right, look, see the White House over there?
Yeah.
Just in front of that, there's another pillbox.
So there'd be a pillbox over there, then another one?
Yeah, there's pillbox after pillbox after pillbox. And they're all covering one another. They could all fire, close enough to fire and support one another.
That's an incredible undertaking. And then presumably also there'd have been, I don't know, anti-tank ditches, mines, barbed wire, tank traps even?
Oh, tank traps, anti-tank cubes, rails, you name it, it's all there.
Most pillboxes were surrounded by a network of trenches, but little evidence of these remains today.
Would there have been as many earthworks as there would have been pillboxes?
More. There'd be far more earthworks than there were pillboxes. When people see a pillbox, they see the concrete, they're blinded by the concrete, they forget the earthworks.
So there'd have been earthworks all around here, would there?
Oh, yeah.
This pillbox marks the beginning of an intricate barrier of defences known as a stop line.
As you drive along, all over the country you see pillboxes sitting there, and they're nearly always parts of systems.
You don't build pillboxes in isolation.
No.
The Carmarthen stop line snakes through the Welsh countryside, a vast line of defences that was designed to halt any German invasion. Because of its remote location, it's one of the best preserved. Now, Francis Pryor and Roger Thomas are tracing its entire length.
Well, Roger, clearly these various defences are following the railway embankment. I mean, you've got tank cubes there, you've got a socking great pillbox there, but what have we got over here?
Right, well, what we've got over here are steel rails. Again, an anti-tank obstacle. And if you look, they're old scrap tram lines.
Oh, yeah.
They've used metal from wherever they can get it.
But why does it just end like that?
That's simple. That's salt marsh. You try and drive a tank round that and it'll sink. And beyond there, you've got further defences.
But, I mean, there's just a vast amount of work in putting these things, bedding them in concrete. I mean, you know...
Enormous. And this is just a small fragment of numerous lines of defence which crisscross the whole country.
Giant ditches cut across the open fields of Britain, forming an impassable barrier against tanks. Tank traps and barbed wire stretched for mile upon mile, and concrete pillboxes lined the countryside. Now only a few scattered traces remain of these great lines of fortifications.
Roger, as we drive along, I mean, it's, you know, you see the odd pillbox and one becomes very aware that this stop line is a major, major undertaking. I mean, 72 miles, it's quite extraordinary.
The stop line was adapted according to the landscape, and exposed sections were more heavily defended.
So, Roger, we're still on the stop line, but now we're in a concrete building that was presumably used for guns. What's that?
For a 4-inch quick-firing gun, which closed the entrance to the estuary here. And it's firing across and there was another one on the opposite side which fired back, totally closing the entrance to any shipping.
So, I mean, this is really serious gunfire, and I mean, put in mind of that medieval castle over there. Is that doing the same thing?
It's exactly the same principle. It's closing the entrance.
Okay, so now the river is forming part of the stop line.
The river is the stop line.
Right, okay, let's go upriver and have a look at it.
The landscape's natural barriers formed the spine of the defences. Rivers and gorges became defended battle lines.
So we're tracing the entire length of the stop line, and this is great fun because it means you go through some absolutely gorgeous country, because the really steep stuff is the stuff that the tanks don't like, isn't it? So
that's the obstacle.
That's the obstacle.
It's the nature of the place. It's not what people think is a military stop line. They think of concrete and defences.
That's right.
This is a far more effective defence than any lump of concrete.
Right, we're 20 miles up the stop line, and we're in this gorge, this ravine, and you can see the height of the edges, completely tank-proof. And then the land dips down behind that pub. That must have been a point of weakness.
Well, that's where the landscape fails, and that's why we have to defend this point, and that's why all the defences are built here, to stop the German tanks coming down that valley.
Even the most unlikely spot was transformed into a potential death trap.
Right, this is the heavy-duty end of the defences. Back there was a big pillbox which covers the natural gap in the side of the valley, and it also fires along the road. Now here, in the side of this pre-war pumping station, they cleverly concealed a brick-built pillbox. And the embrasure, the gun, fires along the stream here, catching anyone who's going to try to sneak either downstream or upstream. Upriver of the pillboxes was a double row of railway line posts that were actually set in concrete. They come down the hillside, across the river, and then up this side of the hill. And if you look at the very top of the posts, you can see they've had some holes cut in them. This was for a steel rope, which was stretched between, and the rope and the lines together made a very effective barrier against tanks. This is so unexpected. This is Second World War barbed wire, complete with the steel spikes that made it into an entanglement. It ran for 30 feet along the river here, down to the water's edge, and it would have been manned day and night by the Home Guard. Now, it's an extraordinary thought, but here we are, in the middle of rural Wales, and there are people waiting for and expecting an invasion. So then a stop line basically consists of a natural feature in the landscape, like a river or a valley, which is reinforced at weak points by pillboxes, barbed wire, and all the rest of it. But the purpose of the thing was to slow down blitzkrieg, was to stop the German army whizzing around across the landscape.
Basically making the whole advance grind to a halt.
Oh, good grief, look at that. Huh. Aren't they fantastic?
The best preserved section of the Carmarthen stop line provides a glimpse of the immense defences that dominated Britain's landscape 65 years ago.
So this is it. We've come to the end of the Carmarthen stop line, and it's taken us 72 miles to get here. Beyond us, over the horizon there, is the sea, and between us and the horizon is a landscape of deep valleys which would have been impossible for tanks to operate in. Now here, this is the last bit of open countryside, and that's why we've got tank traps, we've got a massive pillbox, and where I'm standing, this would have been thickly sown with mines. But I think these fragments of old defensive landscape are so important because they remind us that back in 1940, the entire population of these islands faced the very real threat of invasion.
The Carmarthen stop line is just one of over 100 stop lines that cut across great swathes of Britain. The biggest of them was the GHQ line, which was designed to run the length of Britain, encircling London, and protecting its industrial heartland from invasion from the south and east. But the stop lines needed to be manned, This job often fell to the men of the Home Guard, a massive army of nearly 1.5 million volunteers who had to juggle full-time jobs and then after work hurried to carry out their defence duties. Aged 17, Robert Barnard was based in Barking, East London.
Armed with a Sten gun, we were prepared to take on the Wehrmacht. How successful we would have been, I don't know, but we would certainly have tried.
It's been 62 years since he last fired a machine gun.
All right, ready for firing. Yes, it all comes back to me. I can remember it so well. I like the old Sten. I thought it was an efficient weapon, and it will certainly kill you if you fire it at somebody. But I'd look forward to firing it again after all these years, yeah.
In its early amateur days, the Home Guard was hampered by poor training and lack of weapons. But by early 1941, it had been moulded into an impressive fighting unit who would have fought ferociously to protect their country.
There's not very much kick to a Sten. Just keep the muzzle down, and that usually manages to keep them on the target, which I'm very looking forward to seeing. Okay, let's have a little closer look. Oh yes, I seem to have given him a nasty taste in the mouth, didn't I? Yeah, not bad. I only fired 20 rounds on there, a few off I suppose, but that's to be expected. Yeah, I really got him, didn't I? And most of those are in bursts. When I was a young man, I'm pretty sure I could have put them all into, certainly within the target area in the centre there. But I'm not disappointed. Don't forget I haven't fired that Sten gun, that particular Sten gun, since 1943, which is a very long time. And so it came out quite well, really.
Every Home Guard unit had a specific area to defend, right down to the smallest village. In the spring of 1941, the government's latest plan for the defence of Britain was set in motion. If the Germans managed to overcome the coastal crust and the stop lines, they would encounter another hidden layer of defences, in which the Home Guard would play a pivotal role.
This may look like a tranquil rural scene with a village nestling down there in the valley, but in fact it conceals clues to the final phase of anti-invasion defences that transformed the British landscape. This pillbox is the most obvious archaeological clue. Now, it may seem to sit in isolation, but in fact, if you cut down that hedge, it covers the entire village and has a direct line of fire onto the bridge. Any invading force would have to cross the river, so it was vital to defend the bridge. Now, the first line of defence was provided by a simple roadblock, which consisted of steel wires which were attached onto these railway lines and then stretched across the bridge. Now, the next line of defence was in fact this house. Every house around the bridge became a little miniature fortress. Fire from that loophole up there covered the bridge, and then all the houses around the bridge had loopholes which have subsequently been filled in. Then underneath the bridge they placed explosive charges that could be blown up at a moment's notice. These defences were manned by the local Home Guard, who were motivated because they were protecting their families and their homes. The village was centred around a deadly ambush. Now, this marks a change in defence strategy away from massive lines of tank traps and barbed wire towards an intricate network of roadblocks and ambushes where every village and every crossroads was transformed into a potential battlefield.
The country's fortifications were now in place. By 1944, 20% of Britain was under some form of military control. So how would Britain's defences and the Home Guard have coped if the Germans had actually invaded? Incredibly, it was put to the test. With the help of Andrew Robertshaw, a military historian and expert on war games, we can discover the results.
This is an original map from the summer of 1940, used to plan Hitler's invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. It shows where each of the divisions would have landed on the coast and, very importantly, where the paratroopers would have been dropped just behind the beach defences. In 1974, these plans were used at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst to stage an elaborate war game. The idea of the game was to find out what was the definitive answer to the question, what would have happened if the German invasion had actually occurred in the summer of 1940?
The Kriegspiel, or war game, is a German invention. By weighing up statistical probabilities and plotting each side's strategies, it's possible to estimate the results of a real battle. The Nazi invasion of France was planned by using precisely this technique. But the war game run at Sandhurst was unique. They even invited the German commanders who were involved in the planning of the real Operation Sea Lion, such as Admiral Friedrich Ruge. Pitted against them was an array of Britain's top military experts. It also reunited two former foes, Battle of Britain aces Sir Christopher Foxley Norris and Adolf Galland. Now Andrew Robertshaw and Francis Pryor are retracing every move made in this unique war game.
Before a German invasion could happen, they had to overcome two major obstacles. The first was the Royal Navy, because if those ships got amongst the invasion fleet, there would have been absolute carnage. Nobody would have got ashore at all. Therefore, the plan would have been to lay a thick belt of mines on each side of the invasion, right across the channel, isolating that whole area during the invasion phase. The next problem is the RAF. Again, they could do immense damage to any invasion fleet. In reality, the Luftwaffe went over to bombing the cities, but in the war game, what they did instead was to continue to bomb the RAF airfields, driving back the RAF and allowing the invasion to take place.
With the RAF and Royal Navy kept at bay, the invasion of Britain would soon commence.
2,000 invasion barges were assembled, ready to transport the German army across into Britain. To protect them, the entire German fleet is mobilized, ready to give them the transport and protection they need.
Nazi Germany would now be ready to invade Britain. What would have happened if Nazi Germany had invaded Britain in 1940? To find out, in 1974, the Military Academy at Sandhurst ran one of the most elaborate war games ever staged. The players were men who had actually been involved in the planning of Operation Sea Lion, and they used Hitler's original invasion plans. Now, Andrew Robertshaw and Francis Pryor are retracing every move made by the military strategists and are able to describe it in detail, as if it had actually happened.
This is Cookmere Haven. It's a tranquil cove about 10 miles east of Brighton, but it's also a gap in the great wall of white cliffs that guard the south coast. The Germans knew this, and they had it marked on their invasion maps. But even so, it would not have been a pushover to take.
In the war game, German Stukas began to dive bomb British defences on the coast. The Royal Navy would have taken shelter out of the range of the Luftwaffe at Scapa Flow in the Orkneys. The channel would now lie unguarded for the German invasion fleet.
On the morning of the 22nd of September 1940, the first wave of attackers swept in.
The first force of nearly 90,000 German soldiers began to land on a frontage of nearly 100 miles, from Folkestone in the east all the way along to Brighton in the west.
Now, as soon as they landed on the beach, they were confronted by a tangle of barbed wire and scaffold, and they came under murderous fire from over there. But their job was to clear the beach, whatever the cost.
just after first light, the first of nearly 600 German aircraft swept in low over the Channel. This is what the British feared the most. The arrival of nearly 8,000 German paratroopers, dropping behind the defences into the unsuspecting fields of Kent.
The Royal Navy would have immediately set sail, but it would take them almost 2 days to reach the Channel. Meanwhile, on the beaches of southern England, the invaders would confront the first line of coastal defences. Anti-tank cubes and this concrete wall are one of the few traces of the anti-invasion defences that still remain today. But the attackers' attention would quickly focus on the heart of the defences, the pillboxes.
The job of taking these pillboxes fell to the 6th Pioneer Division, who were specially trained for just this task. But as they approached the target, about here, they came across barbed wire. Once they'd cut or blasted their way through the wire, they then came within throwing range of the pillbox. They could hurl smoke grenades, which effectively blinded the defenders. And as they got closer, they could lob in hand grenades or even burn them out with flamethrowers. But this attack had cost the Germans dear, and they'd lost about half their attacking forces.
The purpose of the coastal defences was not to prevent an invasion. That's impossible. Instead, it was there to provide a delay for an invader. This gave time for forces to assemble and to counterattack. Every hour was absolutely vital.
British reinforcements would have massed inland, rapidly forming the next line of defences. But back on the beaches, German forces would have overrun the fortifications.
Faced with overwhelming numbers, after 3 hours of fierce resistance, the defences eventually collapsed. This meant that the Germans could land their main force of 7,000 men plus supplies down there. The invasion had well and truly started.
The war games suggest that the first day of invasion would have belonged to Germany, with almost 90,000 troops on British soil.
By the second day, there was bitter fighting all along the south coast. Despite the British defence, the Germans still managed to advance 8 miles inland, and the British withdraw to a defensive stop line nicknamed the Winston Line.
As the Germans fought their way from the coast, they came across bridges. Most were defended by pillboxes, but this one at Alfriston was protected by trenches and barbed wire and by the men from the local Home Guard. Now, these chaps knew that they had no chance of defeating the invaders, but they could harass and they could delay them at every bridge and at every crossroad. It would have been an effective tactic, but one which would have cost the Home Guard dear.
It was at this point in the war game that the Royal Navy arrived, creating havoc amongst the German transport ships. At the same time, their army continued to advance inland, but meeting pockets of resistance, booby traps, and constant ambushes. With the removal of road signs, German soldiers very often didn't know where they were.
The villages of southeast England were rapidly overcome, and as the invaders pressed forward, their every movement was reported by Home Guard scouts. But the Germans did not consider the Home Guard to be legal competence, so any that were captured risked being shot.
With the Royal Navy causing absolute chaos in the Channel, the German army ashore has tremendous problems. They're short of reinforcements, they're running out of ammunition, and critically, they have very few, or virtually none, of the tanks. Tanks, which is an important part of the blitzkrieg battles, which had been so successful previously.
The layers of coastal and inland defences would have delayed the Germans exactly as they were intended to. But the battle for Britain would still have been in the balance.
By the third morning of the invasion, the German army has advanced 15 miles inland, right up to the Winston Line, and fighting is now fierce. However, German forces have now lost 30% of their soldiers, either killed, wounded or prisoners. They're reduced to about 60,000 soldiers. And while they can't get reinforcements, more and more British soldiers are arriving in the area. This is the critical moment.
Over there lay the hastily assembled mass ranks of the British Army, reinforced by 2 armoured divisions comprising some 500 tanks. By now the Germans are running out of ammunition, and they lack the necessary support of heavy armour, so the advance ground to a halt. They would never get beyond here.
The German invaders never even reached the GHQ line, the main British stop line. Instead, the German High Command was forced to order a withdrawal. But with a Royal Navy behind them, and with massive British forces to their front, what follows is a catastrophe.
After 1 week, the invasion was repulsed, and of 90,000 attackers, less than a quarter escaped unscathed. But the Home Guard, the Army, and the villagers of southeast Kent, they would have paid a terrible price. But at least they would have had the satisfaction of knowing that they had defeated the only invasion of Britain since the Norman conquest of 1066.
Next week, the final chapter of the defense of Britain, the hidden story of an underground army. They remain one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Second World War, a network of men and women who were trained to form the British resistance.
That's next Monday at 9. Tomorrow at 9, it's a kitchen nightmare, and Gordon Ramsay could have bitten off more than he can chew at a Blackpool bistro. But coming up next tonight, sweet dreams really do come true in the ER. If you want to know the world's greatest actor,
the supreme master of his art.
Can't think of anybody else that could do that.
Sublime.
you ask the experts.
Oh, God.
Oh, Jack Nicholson. What do you want to do?
Up to that with the greats.
He's just sensational.
What a boy. What a boy.
The finest performers as judged by their fellow thespians.
As an artist, he changed my life.
Hey, brother, use your self-control.
A camera can see a good actor thinking. I don't think he's ever given a bad performance.
The world's greatest actor, Sunday at 9 on 4.